President Trump is setting his sights on lowering those. Last week, he announced the rollout of something called Trump RX, and that is a program designed to sell medicines directly to consumers. Let's try to figure out how this works. So far, Pfizer has signed on, agreeing to cut prices on many drugs. At the same time, the president announced a 100% tariff on imported drugs unless those drug companies move manufacturing to the US. Obviously, that's easier said than done. Experts say both ideas could reshape the pharmaceutical market, but what does it mean for patients? Joining us now is Dr. Payal Kohli, adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins and Duke Universities. Doctor, so great to see you. Okay, so 100% tariff President Trump wants on brand name drugs. What does this mean for patients?
Good morning. Physicians are really worried about what the impact of these types of reforms could be on our patients. And I know my patients have been asking me almost every single day. So the good news here, Allison, is that largely drug prices are going to remain unaffected because it doesn't apply to generic drugs. And we know that 90% of drugs that are filled are generic drugs. Now, when it comes to those 10% brand name drugs, we could see a much higher price for patients. And that really depends on whether the manufacturer or the insurance company ends up passing along that tariff to the patient. Now, 100% tariff is a big deal. It's double the price of the drug, but I will emphasize that the margin on many of these brand name drugs obviously is very large. And so we see drugs like Botox, for example, that are made exclusively overseas, that's made in Ireland. Those could have a huge impact. But I'm more concerned about cancer drugs, blood and lung cancer drugs. Imagine if a cancer patient can't afford their treatment because the insurance company is passing along this tariff to them.
Dr. Coley, unfortunately, I think the headline is going to be about Botox and not about the important drugs that you just mentioned. Hearing that in some of the different markets I've worked in, I know a lot of women are going to have a reaction to that. But I do want to ask, when you look at this overall plan, is there anything that stands out to you as an ingenious move or one that's been needed to be made?
I think it is really important to talk about lowering drug prices. And I think in that sense, this has been a long time coming because this is outrageous what we're charging our patients for our drugs. And, as a cardiologist, my patients are often on 2, 3, 4, or 5 brand name drugs. And I sometimes have to sit down and make a decision with them. Hey, this is going to cause a stroke if you go off of this, but you can't pay your rent this week. So I think the discussion about making drugs more affordable is a great idea. Somehow the idea of Trump RX, which is a direct to consumer, incentivizes brand name drugs, and this tariffs disincentivizes it. So they're almost at odds with each other. So I'm curious to see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, and I'm always thinking about unintended consequences here. If you put 100% tariff on these companies, say they bring manufacturing here, won't that dramatically increase the cost of these drugs? Because just quite frankly, they're going to spend tens of millions in manufacturing and labor costs 10 or 20x.
That's exactly right, Dave. That's exactly how I feel because, think about all the regulatory as well as you pointed out, the financial implications of moving manufacturing from all these other countries where you can make it much cheaper, much more efficiently here to the United States, not to mention the time that it takes. It takes on average about 2 to 5 years to move manufacturing here. So my concern is if this starts filtering over into their generic market, let's say one drug company makes brand name drugs and they use that to subsidize the generic drugs, which don't have much of a margin. Are we now going to start thinking about drug shortages of generic drugs, which to me would be catastrophic?
Do we know why Pfizer was eager to sign on? I know this is new news, but do we know what's in it for them?
We don't know, Allison, but I do know their stock prices went up when they did sign on with this. And we don't know necessarily if that means that the drugs will be cheaper for the insured patients because, the Trump RX direct to consumer is a cash pay system. It's a wholesale price for a drug paying cash. But is that even cheaper than the insurance cost that was negotiated? And we know for a lot of patients that have insurance, it won't count against their deductibles. And so people may not be tempted to pay cash for it when they have insurance. I don't really even know what the impact is going to be for most of the insured Americans out there.
Dr. Coley, with anything with medicine, healthcare, payment, insurance, it's so nuanced, so much to dive into. So we'd love to have you back on the show to further discuss that. Is that okay with you?
I would absolutely love that. And I think we can't talk about this enough. So thank you guys for having me this morning.